The June 11, 2020 Planning Commission meeting. The Planning Commission is made up of 7 volunteer residents appointed by the City Council. Most items we make recommendations to the Council. However, some items we have final decision-making authority subject to an appeal to the City Council. For each item, there will be a staff report, a chance for the applicant to speak, and then time for public comment. We start with the pledge. If you're able, please stand. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, starting with Mr. Markegard, if you could give an overview about the WebEx.
Sure. Madam Chair, Commissioners, this is our 6th remote meeting since the pandemic started. We have 3 people physically present in the chambers tonight. Everybody else is joining remotely, including planning commissioners, staff, applicants, and members of the public. So if you're watching live and would like to testify, you can call the number on the screen, 952-563-8926, or send an email to planning@bloomingtonmn.gov, and you'll receive instructions on how to participate remotely. We do have one person that said that they or has already registered to speak tonight. And I would note that that number will be scrolling across the bottom of the screen throughout the meeting if you need to refer to it. Unless you're watching on delay, then it would not be there. So all votes must be conducted by roll call, and that's all I have.
Thank you. If we could move on to item 1 then, please.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair and Planning Commissioners. Let me try to share my screen here. And Mr. Markegard, okay, here we go. All right, are the slides viewable?
Yes, we can see them, Mr. James.
Okay, thank you. So this first item is a privately initiated city code amendment to allow banks without drive-throughs in the C3 and C5 commercial zoning districts. So the applicant is specifically interested in having a bank without a drive-through at the former Wedding Day Jewelers site with at 7901 Penn Avenue, which is zoned C3. So with this proposed amendment, that use then would be permitted at the site. So banks today are defined in the code as an establishment with the primary purpose of deposit banking, included but not limited to commercial banks, savings institutions, and credit unions. So by this definition, banks have a retail component. They usually have a teller that's present, and they typically include a few offices at least. And looking at the use table, then banks are permitted use in most commercial zoning districts. However, they're limited in the C3, C4, and C5 districts. And so by limited, it means that they cannot locate in a standalone building and make up the entire floor area. Instead, they're only allowed to occupy up to 25% of the building's floor area. So currently the code, as shown here, treats all banks the same, whether or not they have a drive-through. So the first proposal then, the first proposed change is to distinguish banks without drive-throughs from those that do have them. So you'll see with these images, banks with drive-throughs are certainly more common in the city. Most of the city's existing standalone banks have drive-throughs and oftentimes several lanes. Also, banks with drive-throughs kind of obviously are much more auto-oriented than those without. Whereas those without drive-throughs aren't especially common, but has been a recent trend for them as more and more online banking services become available. Additionally, banks without drive-throughs might be able to better reuse existing office or retail space that might be vacant. So then the second proposed change then is to allow banks without drive-throughs as permitted in C3 and C5 zoning districts. All other use designations would remain the same. And really the substantive changes that are proposed tonight are shown in blue in the table here on the screen. So staff's perspective is that a bank without a drive-through would operate and really have similar off-site impacts as an office or a standalone retail type of use. So you can compare on the screen here how offices and retail are allowed today. So staff's recommending that banks without drive-throughs then be permitted in the same way that office and retail is permitted, thereby permitting in the C3 and C5 districts. So currently the C3, C5 districts are all located in and around the Penn American district, with just a few exceptions. There's a couple parcels just to the east of I-35, shown in the map here in red. So staff believes that a bank without a drive-through in this area would also fit the intentions of that Penn American district, in that it would support a more walkable, pedestrian-friendly type of use or type of environment, and that this bank then would also support a mix of residential and commercial uses in that area, enhancing the livability of the area. So the other benefit of the change is that it would allow more reuse options for a few smaller buildings that are legally non-conforming in this area today. So with that, I do have a motion that staff is recommending approval. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I believe the applicant is also available as well.
All right. Any questions for staff? Commissioner Goldsman.
Thanks, Madam Chair. If we could go back to the second or the third slide, I did have a question about the amendments of the next slide here.
This one.
Oh, that one, correct. So I noticed you mentioned that we're trying to follow the office and retail space, but I'm looking at the B1 and the C1 districts for retail service. These are retail type banking institutions. So can you talk a little bit about those two zones and why a bank without drive-through would be permitted, but the retail service would be a limited use in those two zones, B1 and C1?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Commissioner Goldsman. So in B1 and C1, retail is limited today. However, you'll notice in C1 that banks with or without drive-throughs are already permitted. And so with this amendment, keeping in mind it is a private initiated amendment, staff didn't want to, add on a limitation to banks, reducing the use in other districts. And looking at B1, though, kind of with a similar idea that this being a privately initiated code amendment, banks are not allowed in that district today with or without drive-throughs. And really that B1 district is just a few parcel zone B1, and they're really intended for more of the less intense, more neighborhood-oriented service or commercial service type uses. So again, understanding that the applicant's really interested in permitting banks without drive-throughs in C3. Staff didn't want to make additional proposals beyond the scope of that applicant's interest.
Perfect, thank you.
Other questions for staff? I'm not seeing any. Would the applicant wish to speak on this item?
Sure, yeah. Thank you very much for having me, and thanks a lot, Sean, for all your help with this. More specifically, we are looking to include, like we said, the financial services section with a new kind of innovative bank in this area. It fits very well in with the kind of the motif and the original intention of the C3 district. In that these areas usually incorporate high foot traffic. They want the pedestrian traffic to be around the areas, while at the same time utilizing the same retail functions as most of these spaces in here. So that's kind of the intention. Also, the other intention is that there will be no drive-throughs, here. So we wanted to keep that intention still in the area. So that's kind of what we wanted to do. It's kind of what we've been talking about for the past couple months together, and I'm hoping that we move forward. So thank you very much for everything.
Thank you. Any questions for the applicant? I'm not seeing any. Do we have any one from the public who wishes to speak on this item?
Madam Chair, we did not have anybody pre-register, and we have not had anybody register since the meeting started.
All right. Do I have a motion to close the public hearing then? Commissioner Solberg?
Madam Chair, make a motion to close the public hearing.
Commissioner Roman?
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Solberg, second by Commissioner Roman. All those in favor say aye. Commissioner Goodrum?
Aye.
Commissioner Solberg?
Aye.
Commissioner Goldsman?
Aye.
Commissioner Corman?
Aye.
Commissioner Roman?
Aye.
Commissioner Albrecht?
Aye.
That is an aye from me. Motion passes 7-0. Moving on to discussion on this item. Commissioner Roman?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am supportive of this amendment. I think that as we are seeing more of our C3 area develop and seeing it head in the direction, I think that was part of the vision in the original previous comprehensive plan. I think this is very much in alignment with it. As the orange line, we're about maybe a year and a half away from that. These kinds of less auto-centric things in this area of our city are very much in alignment, so I am supportive.
Thank you. Commissioner Goldsman?
Thanks, Madam Chair. I would second what Commissioner Roman says. Now, one of the things that I have in the back of my mind is during this current pandemic, I would say actually it's probably the first time in about a decade I've used the drive-through of the bank, and it was quite convenient for me to use. And obviously distance, I know a lot of the lobbies are closed, so I support this overall. I think a timing and obviously the current situation is something to think about, but I think the intent for what we hope is the future when we can have more walkable, more face-to-face conversations and person-to-person interactions. It's definitely a move in the right direction.
Any other discussion, or is there anyone who would like to make a motion? Commissioner Roman?
Thank you, Madam Chair. 1 second here. Bring it back. In case PL 2020-78, I move to recommend approval of the ordinance as attached to the staff report to amend Chapter 21 of the City Code to allow banks or financial institutions without drive-throughs as permitted uses in the C3 and C5 zoning districts.
Commissioner Albrecht?
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Roman, seconded by Commissioner Albrecht. All those in favor say aye. Commissioner Goodrum?
Aye.
Commissioner Solberg?
Aye.
Commissioner Goldsman?
Aye.
Commissioner Corman?
Aye.
Commissioner Roman?
Aye.
Commissioner Albrecht?
Aye.
And that is an aye from me. Motion passes 7-0. This will move on to the July 6th City Council meeting. Moving on to item 2.
Yes, Madam Chair, Mr. Centenario will be presenting item 2.
Okay.
I think he's getting the presentation ready.
All right.
Mr. Markegard, it does not look like I'm able to share my screen at the moment, but oh, there we go. Sorry for the awkward transition here. Okay, so sorry. Let's try this again. There we go. Can everyone see the presentation okay?
Yes, thank you.
Great, thank you. So item 2 on your agenda is for American Square plan development. And what that entails is a 2-phase plan development. Phase 1 is intended to be a 242 unit market rate apartment building. That's currently a surface parking lot. And then phase 2 would be a 86 unit workforce housing development. Originally, the applicant did apply for 2 variances to bluff protection standards. However, the City Council very recently adopted essentially a rewrite of the bluff protection standards, and that was in the works for quite some time. And those amendments were published in today's Sun Current, so they are official. And because the variances are no longer necessary for what the applicant is proposing, they have withdrawn those. So we are asking you to take action on the preliminary and final development plan for the American Square development. So here's the existing conditions for this area. So we're in the Southwick District, and the site, obviously the site is pretty much developed. You can see quite a bit of surface parking, but in addition, there's an existing hotel, quite a bit of office development, condo development that you can see along the bluff. Some of the primary features of the proposed development is they would essentially be converting surface parking lots into development, both 6-story apartment building on phase 1, which I'll show you in more detail in a moment. But then a second surface parking lot being converted to a parking structure, as well as a 5-story workforce housing building. So here's the existing conditions for what's intended to be phase 1. Again, so this is looking southeast from more or less American Boulevard. And again, surface parking lot, you can see the trail on the north side of the site. And that leads, if you're looking off the screen, that leads to the refuge to the east. Graphic represents the preliminary development plan in a plan view. So phase 1, if you can follow my cursor, is a 6-story market rate building, 242 units. And that would be built quite close to American Boulevard East. And so in the HXR district, this whole site is zoned HXR, excuse me. There isn't a minimum building setback relative to public right-of-way. That being said, we still need to make room for public easements. So essentially in the HXR district, the setback is whatever the public easement is in that particular location. So the applicant, through separate applications, is working on some easement changes, and that's in process, which we are supportive of. But essentially, the setback is only about 10 feet from American Boulevard East. So that does, again, like we want to see in the South Loop District, very much create a frame American Boulevard, create more of a corridor with a built environment as opposed to surface parking lots, and that would definitely be accomplished with this project. Phase 2, as I mentioned, is two main components in Phase 2. One is the 86 unit workforce housing development, and then a structured parking lot, parking structure. And that really is to serve shared uses within the American Square development. The surface lot that exists today serves one of the office buildings within the development, and would also be shared with the proposed development tonight. So as we see Bloomington densifying, in particular within our South Loop District, we're going to continue to see more shared parking. So you don't have entirely independent pots of parking where they aren't used a large portion of the day. But in this case, if you share parking between residential uses and office uses, you can actually have, it works quite well from a park peak standpoint. This is a three-dimensional representation of the preliminary development plan. So on the right side of the screen, you see the market rate, and again, this is along the river bluff. Like I mentioned, they don't need any variances anymore now that the bluff protection standards have been revised, but they are along the bluff, so that certainly is very unique for this site. And then you can see on the left side of the graphic, the workforce housing with the parking structure in between. This is a phase 2 image. We'll get back to phase 1 as we talk about the final development plan, but for the PDP, we really actually have a lot of information for phase 2, more than we normally would for a PDP for a future phase. But this is a three-dimensional image of as you approach the building, how you would access the parking structure from the north. So this would be this drive that's in the center of the screen is a north-south connection. There would also be a connection to the west, linking this building to 34th Avenue. So for folks that would live here, probably the most convenient way to get to the light rail station, which is less than a quarter mile's walk, is to go to the west toward 34th Avenue. Similar, again, this is phase 2. So you can see a site plan view, the footprint of the building, and then the top level of the parking structure. So you see the pedestrian and vehicular connection out towards 34th Avenue. And then on the northeast side of the site, you see essentially a ramped access up to the top level of the parking structure. And that leads towards phase 1 as well as American Boulevard. Now, going to the final development plan for phase 1, this is a three-dimensional image of what that phase 1 would look like. So 6 stories. Again, you can see the relationship of the building to American Boulevard East. In terms of building materials, they are not taking any flexibility for exterior building materials. It's a mix of what we've often seen in the past several years between masonry, fiber cement, metal panels, and stucco. So their intent, and we have no reason to believe that they would not be code complying from an exterior material standpoint. Here's phase 1 in plan view form. So you see the footprint of the building. You see the relationship to the bluff. It's really in the footprint to the extent of the building goes pretty close up to the bluff. There is, of course, a little bit of grading, but the applicant has done a tremendous amount of engineering analysis to ensure that there would be no negative impact to the bluff. And if you have further questions, I imagine they'd be able to address that. But as part of our review, we definitely wanted to ensure that the analysis was done. So not only is the bluff safe, if you will, but then there's a tremendous number of mature trees along the bluff, and the vast majority of those would be retained with this phase. With any significant development, we always have at least a couple comments and things we'd like to see changed with the project. And one thing that we wanted to see, and we have a condition of approval, is to provide access and this is again phase 1, to provide a better pedestrian connection between the building and the surface parking lot. And this is really a timing consideration. So the parking lot that I'm showing on the screen is the phase 2 site. And if for some reason phase 2 is delayed or it takes longer than anticipated, we want to ensure that pedestrians have access to the parking in addition to the structured parking that's on phase 1. So it's a minor thing that we'd like to see. They were already intending on having a gravel maintenance path, because the stormwater management is in outlot A, if you can see that on the bottom of the screen. But we want people to have a safe connection if they are utilizing that surface parking lot for overflow parking or guests, for example. This is the landscape plan, and one benefit of a plan development is you can meet landscaping requirements on other properties, and to a small degree, that's what they would do here. Obviously, along the street, they would be implementing quite a lot of trees and shrubs along American Boulevard East. We have a public plaza, which I'll touch on momentarily. On the lower part of the screen, you can see a row of kind of like boulevard style trees along the access drive. But then I wanted to direct your attention to the existing parking structure along American Boulevard East in this general area. And on the phase 1 site itself, they don't meet the quantity requirement, but because the existing parking structure is part of this plan development, they can meet the requirement by having landscaping on that site. And so this is actually a really beneficial thing in our mind, because if you look out there today, and this is just a street view image, there is no landscaping between the parking structure and the street. So the proposal would improve the aesthetic of that area quite a bit. Going on to the public plaza, it's a unique requirement to the HXR district. And we have certain, I guess, performance standards for plazas. One, that there has to be one available to the public. Then we have certain size requirements and seating requirements and some dimensional standards. It appears as though they would be meeting those. You can see a very heavily landscaped plaza area that has a direct connection to the American Boulevard Trail. And, the intent is it'd be a nice place to sit and have lunch or visit with coworkers or friends. Perhaps someone's biking along the trail. They maybe want to stop for a break or something. And this would provide an opportunity to do that. As well as, this is a high amenity market rate building, but then it provides yet another amenity for residents beyond the amenity terrace that they're proposing. And with all high density residential development in Bloomington, the Opportunity Housing Ordinance does apply to this site, and it applies to phase 2. So there is an affordable requirement. However, the applicant is choosing to utilize the payment in lieu of affordable units for phase 1. And essentially what that means is that before the applicant would get permits to start building phase 1, they would provide just under $1.7 million that the city would hold on to in anticipation of phase 2. And there's very detailed timelines for when that would take place. But in terms of our analysis for the related to the Opportunity Housing Ordinance, that's for the second phase. And when we do feel it meets the objectives of the OHO. And on this next slide, we have just a summary of some of the incentives that they are seeking for phase 2. And I want to reiterate that they're not seeking any OHO incentives for phase 1. They wouldn't qualify for those, even with the payment in lieu. And this identify incentives for a future final development plan. So it is something that is relevant to our analysis for the whole plan development, but we will essentially be revisiting phase 2 in relationship to the Affordable Housing Ordinance when that application does come in. Touch on parking, and again, I kind of mentioned this earlier in the presentation on shared parking, and and that's an important factor for this development because they are proposing shared parking, and so they did conduct a parking study That was revised numerous times as the project evolved over the past over year plus 2 years. And essentially, the amount of deviation, if you think of independent standalone uses, is about 33%, which seems quite large. But then when you consider the fact that we're less than a quarter mile from the blue line, we are in the South Loop District where we anticipate intense development, and the fact that they are proposing shared parking between different uses, it works out pretty well. And the parking study reflected that. So from a parking perspective, we're comfortable with the proposal. They are proposing over 700 parking stalls between the two phases, and we do think it is adequate. I just identified this or put this on the slideshow to show that the phase one does propose 2 levels of structured parking. They are seeking a deviation for a slight reduction in the 1 enclosed stall per unit requirement. And we're comfortable with that deviation. 1, because it's quite small. The applicant doesn't anticipate every tenant needing or desiring a parking space. And hopefully that turns out to be the case. But then in addition, the phase 2 parking structure that would be available to phase 1 residents would essentially well exceed the requirement that we have for enclosed spaces. So not only is it a small deviation, but it's a temporary deviation. And finally, one thing that we've been talking about among staff and the applicant is sanitary sewer service in the South Loop District. So as we mentioned in the staff report, and then we sent a supplemental memo this afternoon, there needs to be sewer improvements within the South Loop District to serve the dense, intense development that we want. And that's a known issue, and the city has planned for those improvements and have even started working on that issue. But after thinking about the proposed conditions that we include in the report, we feel like we want a slightly different condition, namely because, well, to go back to the condition as it reads today, it ties a building permit to the city accepting a bid for a sewer improvement project. And that's okay, but we're not sure exactly when that would be. It's planned, it has to happen, but we couldn't give you a date, an exact date. So we don't want to unnecessarily delay the applicant from getting started on construction, knowing that we need these improvements in order for them to serve their building. So what we're proposing is a slight change. They can see in the lower part of the screen. Instead of tying permits to a bid, we would like it to be tied to the city council accepting a feasibility study and ordering the project. And that essentially ties in funding and then gives a level of certainty that we're comfortable with, so the applicant could get going on their project. With that, we are recommending approval of the PDP and FDP for phase 1, with that minor revision to the preliminary development plan condition number 3. I'm certainly available for questions. We also have Sherry Shilquist in our HRA and a couple of engineering staff, as well as the applicant, and we're all available to answer questions.
Are there questions for staff? Commissioner Roman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a couple of questions. Mr. Centenario, so help me understand, and I probably should have asked this question earlier, but it didn't come to me until as you were walking us through this. We were thinking about this project, phase 1, phase 2, we're asked to consider it as a plan development, a bigger scope. And yet, phase 1 is clearly distinct and phase 2 is distinct. And so in order to build my question, are the residents of phase 2 have access to the amenities of phase 1, or are they fully distinct?
Madam Chair, Commissioner, I think in terms of the amenities, they probably are. Each building would have its own amenity spaces. So I suspect phase 2 residents would not have access to phase 1 and amenities, such as like the pool, for instance. but would have access to the public plaza, for example. That's directly next to phase one.
Okay, because that's what I was wrestling with is the dispersion question. Because while it's if each one is standalone, then that meets the test. But if we consider it as a project, it's very clearly segregated between market rate and affordable. And so I was struggling with that finding.
Understood. I think depending on how many other questions that we get related to affordable housing ordinance, we'll get some help on that from Ms. Showquist.
Okay, and then I have one other question, if I may.
Yes, Commissioner Roman.
Thank you, Mr. Centenario. What is I know we probably have guidelines, well, really there's laws around this, but given the location of this along the bluff and in this part of the city, are there conditions related to potential indigenous burial sites?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Commissioner, it's something that has been in the back of our minds related to burial mounds. We do have a number of them in the city of Bloomington. The applicant is aware of that, and there hasn't been in their due diligence period and their surveying and tree preservation planning any indication that there are any archaeological sites. And we could have a condition related to that. We haven't proposed one. Regardless of whether the city has a condition, there still are state requirements and Native American requirements that if they do come upon something, that they have to, everything has to stop temporarily. So we chose not to include a condition, given that there's some pretty robust regulation with that potential issue.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Solberg.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and maybe this is one more for engineering. I know we talked about the sanitary sewer there, but one of the questions that I think came up a couple years ago, and that was maybe a little bit further to the east, was stormwater capacity. Is there any impact to that based on this development? Do we know that?
Madam Chair, Commissioner, I'll let one of our engineering staff answer that question in more detail. But yeah, obviously the stormwater management plan is a component of their application, and one of the reasons they need that access road to the south is to maintain an existing stormwater facility that was built to serve the entire site. And so a lot of the analysis they did was infiltration analysis to ensure that not only did it meet the city requirements, but that it was just overall adequate for the amount of stormwater that they would need to retain on site. But for a more technical answer, I think Mr. Hanson or Ms. Long could better answer that question.
Yeah, if they have any more information, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
Lon, would you like to unmute Julie or Brian?
Yes, both Julie Long and Brian Hanson are panelists now and can unmute as they're ready.
Yeah, good evening, Madam Chair, Commissioners. This is Brian Hanson, Development Coordinator with the City of Bloomington Engineering. And yeah, we have been working with the applicant on the stormwater component for this and done some analysis. I've been working with them on, as Mr. Centenario mentioned, utilizing that existing basin in that Outlot A area. And based on the information that we've received so far and reviewed, they do seem to be in compliance with our surface stormwater management policies, and we will continue to work with them to ensure that is the case as they move forward with permit application. But we've had extensive conversations with the design team and their engineers, and we are comfortable that they will be able to meet our stormwater management requirements for this site.
Thank you, Mr. Hanson.
Other questions for staff? I'm not seeing any. Would the applicant wish to speak on this item?
Hi, it's Carl Kading. I can speak, or I'll be real brief, and then obviously we'll open ourselves and our team up for questions afterwards. But just wanted to say a few words. Wanted to thank the staff for being so collaborative with us, namely Mike and Brian. They've been great to work with. We've been working on this project in different renditions over the course of the last, I suppose it's been almost 2 years now, hasn't it, guys? And this is where we're at. We're really excited about it. We've owned this site via the ownership of the Crown Plaza Hotel for 5 or 6 years now. Worked with the staff over there coming up with what's in front of you today over the course of the last couple of years. As you're all well aware, it's one of the last really great development sites in Bloomington along this corridor. And we think the work that we've put in along with our team on our side has really, I guess, captured those great reviews and what's everything that there is to capture on this site. We think we've done a really good job of kind of honoring the fact that this is one of the last few great development sites for this sort of thing in Bloomington. And so I just want to express our excitement. We're eager to see it come to fruition, and just happy to be here today. And thank you for the time. We'll open ourselves up for any questions. I think we have architectural engineering and our co-development partner, Mike Waldo with Ron Clark Construction on the line as well.
Thank you. I have a question. Could you maybe talk to the reasoning for segregating between the market rate and workforce apartments?
This is Mike Waldo with Ron Clark Construction. I think Carl will pass that one on to me normally. One of the things we do quite a bit of work in both the affordable housing side and the market rate side. And when you look at a site like this, where you have such an expense to try and build the market rate side to make it work within the component and to get the rents you need there, as you start to mix more affordable in, you make that very difficult. In this case, we felt it better to build more overall workforce apartments, which we will end up obtaining with the with having the standalone building. Some of the other things, just from a regulation perspective, it allows people to stay in a workforce building longer if it's 100% affordable. They don't have to, normally if you income continues to grow, you're out of there at a certain point after your incomes have raised to 120 or 140% of the median. And so we find that the stability of those apartments having to be 100% affordable on the other 6 that we have is a very strong thing. People truly make it their home instead of just a temporary location. Again, but about 10% of the people we see buy houses in the community within the first 2 to 3 years. So we're seeing a low turnover overall, but when people turn over, they tend to have put away some money and saved some money because they're not paying 50, 60% of their incomes anymore. And so it's worked well. And so we think the shared outside amenities, the shared location, that I don't really feel it's much segregated. I think the 2 projects together, standalone, make a much better whole than if we tried to merge everything. I think we wouldn't make it both work monetarily and I think function as well.
Thank you. And then another question I have, looking at the market rate building, it looks like you have some 3 bedrooms. Are you anticipating these being families or just, I guess I'm just curious what you're anticipating regarding families and small children there.
I think in our work with Stephen Scott Management, who will be managing it, it was really, you could have made some oversized 2s, but in a lot of cases, you'll have people, families in transition that'll want a place to stay for a couple of years as they're coming into a community, deciding what they want to do. I think it would be more of a younger kid scenario. We don't expect, a lot from a family perspective, more of a younger family person with the kids, maybe 0 to 6 or 7 that might live in there. But it is not, the family side will be much more in the workforce area where we'll have more of those.
Thank you. Commissioner Goldsman.
Thanks, Madam Chair. My question is actually a follow-up to the conversation about children. Can we go to the slide with the plaza? So one of the questions I have is really about safe places for those children to play. And the plaza, I think, is great, but what type of amenities are you planning to put in there for those younger children that would be in those type of units?
If you look at, I think if Mike, you can pull up one which shows the back pool deck and the whole amenity structure on the rear. We focused a lot of the apartment amenities to the back on the market rate side. And you can see you've got a pool, We've got potential hot tub. We've got a little area that might be a putting green. We've got areas to grill. So from a play area there, we think there'll be a lot of things for them to do. We don't technically have a full play structure, but we're seeing less and less of those. It's much more of organic play areas now with the two green spaces. We can do kind of multi-purpose that based on the tenant need versus trying to redetermine it ahead of time without knowing the tenants.
And if I could add to that, just a hair, Carl kidding here. Yeah, so we have this great space in the back for all the families and tenants of the building. But I would like to note that based on the previous lease up of the Indigo and the current lease up of the Fenley, the South Loop district itself, in the demand patterns for the different styles of unit, is acting much more urban in its tenant makeup than it is suburban. And so while Bloomington as a whole leases up more as a suburban market, you'll notice with our unit mix here, we're intending and expecting, based on those that have gone before us, that this is going to have more of an urban makeup, which, again, millennials, younger families with younger kids, as kind of a jumping off point on their way, perhaps out of the downtowns into the suburbs to set up and have a family, make a family, larger family. But again, the way the other two are acting, we're not expecting large families here. It's not taking place at the other two buildings, so we wouldn't expect it to necessarily take place at ours either.
Thank you. Commissioner Goldsman, did you have another question?
No, thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Solberg?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a follow-up. I thought I heard Mr. Waldo say that the outside areas are shared use between the facilities. Was that correct?
No, just the public plaza would be the actual pool deck that you're seeing right now. That would be restricted to the market rate and friends and family of those people, of those residents, excuse me.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the applicant? I'm not seeing any. Do we have public comment on this item?
Yes, we do. Madam Chair, we've pre-registered Mr. Kyle Groves, who is on the line, and we have a couple others that I'm not recognizing, so after he speaks, I'll check in with him.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you very much. My name is Kyle Groves. Thank you, Madam Chair and the Commission. This is my first meeting jumping in with one of these, so I'm really enjoying everything so far. I do live in the Indigo Apartments currently over at 8101 on 33rd. So I had a few things I wanted to comment on, just from a perspective of someone who's living in these apartments and as someone who would like to stay in the area. So number one, and this, I guess, the more of a comment or question, is anybody on the engineering or the architecture team for the course of the applicant, have they worked on either the Indigo or the new one across the street, the Feltman?
And I guess, sorry, I should have explained a bit more about the public comment period. So you're free to voice questions. However, it's not meant like a Q&A. So if you have questions, you can voice them, and then the commissioners at the end, if they believe there are issues that do need to be followed up on with either the applicant or staff, they will go ahead and address those questions. The public comment period is meant to take testimony.
Got it.
So just so you're aware.
So sample question, just so then I can save everybody some time if it's not an appropriate one. For the architecture team / the mechanical engineering team for these apartments, are there plans to have operable windows on either the phase 1 or the phase 2 units? Is that the type of question we're looking for today?
Well, you're free to voice whatever questions you have, and then basically this is a public hearing, and so we have certain findings we have to make to reach a determination. So if we feel that those are important to reaching the findings, or if we feel they need to be followed up on, the commissioners can go ahead and ask those after the public comment period.
Okay. So my question is, do any of these units have plans for operable windows to be opened up? I'm currently in the Indigo Apartments. The only thing we have is our balcony window. And I gotta say, it gets pretty stuffy in here. Even if I open the window or open the balcony door all the way, there's not really a good way to cycle airflow through because all of the windows are closed. I understand that we are in a part of town where things are loud. The airport's right next door. The trains go honk honk all the time. However, it is my understanding that just because you have a really nice double pane window, that's going to do a great job for sound reduction. And for the people who do want fresh air in the apartments, opening that window is not going to significantly, or that's their choice to make. But when that window is closed, the sound performance of having that multi-pane window is going to be similar, if not 100%, as a fully sealed apartment. So that is one comment that I'd like to pass off to the architecture and mechanical team, or that question whether or not that is in the works or on the plan set for the project. Another question that I have for the applicant is, what are the plans for bike storage? Based off the first item from our meeting today, we were discussing some, reducing our reliance on car culture in this part of town. There is a lot of public transit. There are a lot of trails. At the Indigo Apartment, there is a dedicated, secure key fob access for bike storage. That is an amazing amenity, and I'm really happy that it's here. And I would like to see that continue if it were planned as part of either of these. So that would be my question. What is the plan for storing a large number of bikes for the tenants or their guests in these new units, either phase 1 or phase 2?
Thank you. And then did you have, besides your questions, did you have any additional comment you wanted to make on the item?
Yes, just a moment. I'm looking at some of the notes that I was taking. For phase 2, there was a comment earlier for if phase 2 gets delayed, increasing pedestrian access up from the road from the current surface parking lot down on the south end of the site. Are there any plans, or I suppose, is it practical or legal, whatever, to get pedestrian access connected through the current condominium complex at 8121 34th Avenue South, basically allowing people to make a pedestrian loop from the east side, or from the current project property south up through into the Apple Tree Square business area. I also do work over in that area, and then come around the Crown Plaza, either through the Applegate Square or around on 34th Avenue. Are there any plans to connect that all the way through? Is that possible? Is that feasible? That as a neighborhood resident, that is a walk that I would like to be able to take through, assuming we have some sort of easement or the ability to make that through. I know the grade is really steep in the southeast corner of the proposed phase 2 area. So the boiled down question is it possible, or are there plans to get pedestrian access around the south end of that site into the existing developed area? I do have a comment related to parking. So I'm in the Indigo complex. I do have a car. I do park there. Would like to go car free eventually, but I would say the internal parking structure has parking floors all the way up, including a 7th floor, which is currently the roof access. Floors 2 through 6 are pretty much always at 90% capacity. We do have a parking structure and spaces on floor 7 that is almost always empty. I never see anybody up there. So I would agree that having less than 1 parking stall per unit throughout the whole complex, that is tracking with my user experience over here at the Indigo complex. And then as another comment on the living patterns and whether we're looking for an urban market or a suburban market, 29, so that would put me solidly in the millennial category. I don't necessarily have plans for making a family in the near future, but I also don't have plans for moving out to the suburbs if I were to get into a family situation. I want to live in an urban environment, or I want to live out in the sticks. Being here in the Twin Cities, living in the Indigo apartments, having access to public transportation and a safe place to store my bike that's not out on the street are all really important to me. But I want to have an ability to continue that lifestyle, even if I do have a family. And, after my kids grow up past 3, 4 years old, what are we going to do with the elementary school kids? What are we going to do with the teenagers? I understand why the common spaces are back behind the wall. I understand in that southeast corner of the phase 1 property. That makes a lot of sense. But generally speaking, I think if we do have more of these projects proposed, we would want to consider having some sort of an open space park, or perhaps some extra development. I don't know who owns the Bloomington Central Park south of the Hyatt, a little bit west of this project site, but having additional space like that, another one of those parks and plazas, I think would be really great for the community if we could open up that green space, especially if we are doing things like having parking structures that are integrated into the structures of these proposed multi-level developments.
Thank you.
Market rate, comments on parking, bike storage. Yeah, I think those were all of my comments. Thank you for the time.
All right, thank you. Mr. Merkergaard, did you want to check if there was additional?
Yeah, Madam Chair, we have one call-in user. I just want to make sure that, so phone number starting in area code 507. I'm going to unmute you just to check in, see if you had a comment. If anybody's a call-in user from area code 507. Do you have a comment?
This is Brody Northern with Kading Development.
Okay. It's part of the applicant team. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kading, did you have a question?
No, actually, I didn't know if you wanted our team to field Mr. Grove's questions or if Mike wanted to tackle them first.
So I think what I'll do is allow the planning commissioners to follow up as they feel appropriate on the questions. And I will go ahead and get started. Could you address the plans for bike storage, since that is something we tend to look at in these projects?
Yes, of course. Yes. Bike storage, at this point, we have dedicated 233 tiered bike storage spots in the basement, plus a repair area. And then there's 10 outside for the market rate building. So we have a pretty significant number of essentially 1-to-1 for our unit count. So I appreciate Mr. Groves bringing that up and noting it. It has certainly been part of our discussions with the city and the staff, and we'd love to see this area continue to go more and more car free. With the light rail station here and the access to the airport, some of the great bike trails out here, and obviously the growing use of services such as Uber and Lyft. We'd love to see this garage not sit at 100% capacity all the time. It'd be good for everyone out here, good for the environment, and so we're set up 233 secure bike storage locations in the basement, plus a repair area, and 10 outside.
Thank you. And then I suppose if you want to also just follow up on Mr. Grove's question about the windows.
Sure, yes. All windows are operable to 4 inches per city code.
Thank you. And then, Mr. Centenario, could you maybe just do a brief overview of what the pedestrian access is like in that area?
Sure, Madam Chair. I think what I'll try and do is go to the overall aerial. And I think I understood the guest's comments to be essentially that pedestrian connectivity through the development isn't the greatest. Specifically related to the condo development, the applicants don't have site control of that development, so they would not be able to make pedestrian improvements on that site. We also have, of course, the bluff to contend with, so having sidewalks or pedestrian access to the south of these buildings probably is not an option. That being said, from for this particular development, the overall pedestrian access for both phases is a significant improvement from the existing condition. I'll go to a different slide here. And right now, where you have the phase 2 surface parking lot, there is a really significant drop in grade. So you can't walk from west to east through the site, whereas there would be a pedestrian connection from the phase 2 building to 34th Avenue, so improving that access for those residents. And similarly, for the market rate building, there would be a direct sidewalk connection between American Boulevard East and the main entrance. And given the comments that we had, there would be a connection between the market rate building and either the surface parking for phase 1, or as part of phase 2, a pedestrian connection for access to the parking structure. So for this development, the pedestrian access is a significant improvement. We'd have to research in more depth other connections within the development and see what improvements could be made there, and if the applicant's willing to engage in that discussion.
Thank you. Any other questions at this time, or is there anyone who wishes to make a motion regarding the public comment?
And Madam Chair, I see that Mr. Groves does have his hand raised. I don't know if he has additional comments.
Mr. Groves, do you have additional comments?
Apologies, that was an old hand raise. I'll put that down.
Okay, thank you. All right. Then is there any other questions while we have the public hearing open, or does anyone want to make a motion to close the public hearing? Commissioner Albrecht?
I move to close the public hearing.
And Commissioner Goldsman?
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Albrecht, second by Commissioner Goldsman. All those in favor say aye. Commissioner Goodrum?
Aye.
Commissioner Solberg?
Aye.
Commissioner Goldsman?
Aye.
Commissioner Corman?
Aye.
Commissioner Roman?
Aye.
Commissioner Albrecht?
Aye.
And that is an aye from me. Motion passes 7-0. Moving on to discussion. Commissioner Solberg?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I like the proposal that's before us. It's utilizing some of the existing underutilized parking that's out in the South Loop. I think the development is doing a nice job of kind of fitting in to the surroundings where it can pinch between the bluff and road and other development. And while I think there's a need for more public space out there, as even Mr. Groves had brought up during the hearing, I can certainly support this application, and realizing that that is not the applicant's responsibility to find that for the community.
Commissioner Albrecht?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I too can support this project. I appreciate all of the work that the staff has done regarding the bluff standards and making it a much smoother transition to go through that process for the applicant. So just wanted to mention that, as well as I think this is a great upgrade to the land use, existing land use, and be great for more folks to live near public transit. So I'm in support.
Commissioner Goldsman?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just two comments here is I think the project overall is great, and I agree with Commissioner Albrecht that it's a good use of the land, and obviously turning a surface parking lot into something that is developed and places for new residents to come in and live is great. I did like the plaza area. One area that I'm a little bit disappointed in is just a play area. I'm interested to see what type of organic play areas could exist. Concern about the phase 2, however, there really won't be any outside places other than that public plaza for children to play. And I think in those units especially, there will be families involved. So again, I'm supportive, but I'd like to see a little bit more area for play for those children's, for safe areas for them. And then the other thing I just want to comment on is I really appreciate the city looking at more flexible parking arrangements. A lot of times we talk about deviations, and I think having the shared parking structure being used by 2 different uses, office during the day and residents by night, is a nice way to be creative and flexible. So I really appreciate that, and I'm in support of the proposal as it stands. Thanks.
Commissioner Corman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm also in support of this application. I really like seeing how we continue to work in this area in the part of the development. I also have to agree with Commissioner Goldsman on the plaza part and the I would use the same word, disappointment. I do feel disappointed as well of finding out that there's not like additional opportunities for attracting more families. I understand that probably we're not looking into large families, but even if it was just a young member of a family, whether it's a teenager or it's a small child, I think it's important to have an area for recreation, especially during the warmer months of the year. We have talked for so long about the need of attracting more younger families into Bloomington, that I just get concerned that maybe we're missing an opportunity here by not having additional amenities, outside amenities for the kids. It is possible that some people will probably not look into being in one of those apartments in one of those places if they don't find that they don't have even a playground if they're if a young family with a child is considering. So that takes away that future opportunity too for a family that's growing to stay in Bloomington, to really have that time and that opportunity to get to know the city more and to live in that area, get to know our city, to fall in love with the city and to create that sense of belonging. And then they can stay with us and, later on moving into a bigger place. So but overall, I'm in complete agreement with that or support of it. But yeah, definitely would like to have seen more opportunities for other families.
Commissioner Goodrum.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, also I'm supportive of the project. I just want to follow up on Commissioner Roman's comments earlier about burial mounds. There are plenty of historically mounds out in that area, and there is their benefit. I don't think a condition is needed, as long as the applicant's listening. Probably their benefit to have an analysis done or a study done. I hate to have this project slow down because of to not take a look at the potential of impacts of burials and then shutting down a project until something's corrected during the construction period. So I just want to repeat that comment from Commissioner Roman. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Roman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Echoing all the comments that have been made, I think overall the project is, a strong candidate. And I also appreciated Mr. Schmidt from the Port Authority in the notes talked about the, recently we had the question about charging for parking and affordable, and I was glad to see that note was made in there that we do expect that affordable units have access to parking without additional surcharge. So no major concerns about this project.
Any other comments or discussion, or would anyone like to make a motion? I see Commissioner Corman's hand is up, but I don't know if that is from.
Oh, I just kept my hand up, but I can read it.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. In case PL 2020-83 haven't been able to make the required findings, I move to recommend City Council approval of preliminary development plans for a 328 residential unit multi-phase American Square plan development and final development plans for a 242 unit apartment building at 3701 American Boulevard East, subject to the conditions, including the revision to PDP condition number 3 and code requirements attached to the staff report.
Commissioner Albrecht?
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Corman, second by Commissioner Albrecht. All those in favor say aye. Commissioner Goodrum?
Aye.
Commissioner Solberg?
Aye.
Commissioner Goldsman?
Aye.
Commissioner Corman?
Aye.
Commissioner Roman?
Aye.
Commissioner Albrecht?
Aye.
And that is an aye from me. Motion passes 7-0. This will move on to the June 22nd City Council meeting. Unless my, yes, okay. All right, so then moving on, the final item is just approval of planning meeting minutes from the May 21st, 2020 Planning Commission meeting. The only commissioner I believe was absent was Commissioner Goodrum. Commissioner Albrecht.
I move to approve the draft Planning Commission meeting synopsis of May 21st, 2020 as presented.
Commissioner Roman.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Albrecht, second by Commissioner Roman. All those in favor say aye. Commissioner Solberg?
Aye.
Commissioner Goldsman?
Aye.
Commissioner Corman?
Aye.
Commissioner Roman?
Aye.
Commissioner Albrecht?
Aye.
That is an aye from me. Motion passes 6-0. That will conclude the June 11th, 2020 Planning Commission meeting. Our next meeting will be on June 25th, 2020. Thank you.